So things are going to take time, it's a process. So emotionally, it's just the way you're feeling today is not the way you're going to feel 6 months from now or a year from now. And just, select somebody that can be an advocate for you if you're going for an attorney that you feel comfortable with, because it really is a very emotional process. But just take a step back and go step by step and go at your own pace.
Hey everyone, I'm Meredith Shirey. I'm a licensed psychotherapist specializing in relationship issues.
And I'm Isaiah Vallejo-Justy, a divorce attorney.
This is a podcast about filling in the gaps of our relationships, the deeply personal choices we make for our families and ourselves,
and the impact our actions have on the rest of our lives. This is Love Me or Leave Me.
Hey everyone, welcome back. Today is going to be a very special show because we're talking about something that is very much within Isaiah's wheelhouse. We're talking about divorce, and we also have a really awesome guest. We're so excited to have her.
We have one of my partners, actually the newest member of my firm, Nicole Trivlis. She's a matrimonial attorney and also a licensed mediator, and all around great person and good friend. So welcome to the show, Nicole.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here today, guys.
Nicole, can you tell us a little bit more maybe about how you got into matrimonial law or how you came to know Isaiah? Because it's pretty cool that you guys work together. I know he was so excited when you joined the firm.
So I've been an attorney for 12 years now, but I kind of transitioned into the divorce field 7-8 years ago now. I like to say that divorce chose me. I did not choose divorce. It was actually a couple firms of me fighting the transition, but I went from immigration into divorce. And, I like it. I ended up liking it a lot. My background initially was international human rights law. I was an immigration attorney in the beginning of my practice. So I always make jokes that the 25-year-old me is probably shaking her head at today's me. I thought I was going to stop the world from genocide, but now I, represent people going through divorces typically, or matrimonial situations, family issues. But I find that it's rewarding. It's definitely conflict resolution, but on a different scale. I met Isaiah at the first firm that I had worked for as a matrimonial attorney, and we automatically hit it off. And it's really, really exciting to be able to work with him again.
It's interesting that you say that about human rights, just as a quick aside. As a divorce attorney, you deal with human rights issues all the time. Your rights to kids, for example. That's also often called a human right.
Yeah, you know what you are, but you don't think about that when you're 25 and you think you're going to stop the world from wrongdoers out there, but you do. You do it on a different scale. I really enjoy it.
But, it's interesting because with doing something more broad scale, right, there might be a more global impact, but you probably don't even get to see that within your own lifetime because it happens so slowly. So with matrimonial law, I would imagine that you get to see the impact of you advocating for people's rights on a day-to-day basis. And so there's got to be something about that that's really empowering and rewarding.
Absolutely. For me, it's absolutely rewarding. And and that's kind of what I meant before with the 25-year-old me. I think you're too young and you don't understand what life is going to be before you, and with regard to emotions and relationships. So your concept of divorce is so different, fresh-eyed lawyer than you are a little bit further into your practice. So I think I can look back, and I think this was probably a position that I probably should have thought about doing years ago, but I just didn't understand that it was going to be a position that I would be good at.
I can't tell you the number of calls I'll get, and then I don't represent everybody who calls me. It's not always an engagement, but I'm always able to give some good advice to somebody who needs it. That's always a great thing. And I get a lot of calls about emotions and what kind of considerations to go into before you actually get a divorce. And one of the things I hear often is like, when do you know it's really over?
I think it's a very powerful question to ask. Every person asks themselves when they're going through a divorce. How did this happen? When did it happen?
A lot of times I might be having a conversation with someone for months or even years on end where they're going back and forth. They're almost trying to negotiate in their mind. Is it worth tolerating? Like, what are the good things? And so, in some ways too, they can be trying to find ways to justify staying. So that ambivalence about staying or going lasts for a very, very long time. So I think that is something that people need to really, really keep in mind, is that like the decision to get a divorce is not a light one for anyone ever. And so I think by the time that they show up in your office, it's probably because they've gone through a lot of that mourning process, and they've gone through the ambivalence, and they've landed on the side of, okay, I do need to do this. So I would imagine that you guys see people in a place where there's probably a high degree of emotionality, but I would imagine there's also maybe a degree of them being a little bit somber, maybe, or saddened even.
I've had clients come in and react in different ways when they hear that they're about to get divorced, they're about to be served with papers, am I a bad spouse? Also, I've recently too, a lot of people's religious beliefs, they really have a hard time reconciling that emotionally going through a divorce when their religious perspectives are so adamant against it. So I've had a couple of cases recently where people really try to hold on to the marriage and wonder if there's ways to stop the court process and force them into couples counseling. Divorce is a process. So, when they're walking in and there's the quote unquote defendant in the action, they usually need to take time to process what's going through. So their initial reaction maybe is very abrupt or very emotional. And so you just kind of have to give them time, not come at them with the legal documents, not come at them with let's do X, Y, and Z, but try to give them as much time to process it.
Completely agree. I think, you just got to listen. Sometimes people just need somebody to kind of listen to and then guide them as well. So initially, I think you do a lot of listening. One of the things I hear a lot also is, what about the kids? What about the children? How is this going to impact the children that we have? How do we tell them? Those are tough questions. And sometimes I refer them to a therapist who can help them with that as well. And, usually I think we say that, make sure you speak to the children together and tell them that you love them and you support them and this isn't about them.
Sometimes the children are what keep people in a marriage that they would otherwise leave. And it's not like there's a good or a bad to that. I think every situation is very different. You really have to consider your individual circumstances. But one of the questions I get all the time is now a good time for me to end my marriage, right? Is now a good time, like in my child's life? From my side of the couch, if you will, I don't see it as necessarily being indicative of time, because no matter when you get a divorce, it's going to have an impact on your children. There's no way around that. However, the degree to which it has an impact on your children is entirely up to the parents. It's incumbent on the parents to try to make sure that they still have some civility, that they are not using their children as pawns, that they're not trying to get the children to turn against the other parent, and that they're really making a lot of space for that child to process, that they're not kind of forgetting that their kid, no matter how old the kid is going to have a very emotional response to it. So how well adjusted they are after the fact is entirely up to how well the parents deal with each other during the divorce and how much space they make for their children to talk about their emotions. There are actually studies now that indicate that it is much better for your children's adjustment to get out of an unhealthy marriage than for them to see the fighting and the bitterness, and then the parents who are both very detached because they've got so much going on, that it's actually better than for them to see you live with more civility apart than to stay together and be at war.
I've seen couples be able to keep a relationship together and have it go until the kids go to college and then they separate amicably. But others are just incapable of being within the same household without fighting. And then you have to think, what's best for the children? Is that what's best for the children, to see this animosity in a household on a day-to-day basis?
What do you notice maybe about the couples who navigate this more successfully? Are there any traits or characteristics or maybe some patterns that you see that help people or that stand out for the people who can do this better?
I think the best couples are the ones that can put aside their animosity towards each other and really focus on the children and communicate on behalf of the children. Because your wife or your husband may not have been the best spouse doesn't mean that they're a bad parent, or doesn't mean that they're not the parent of that children. I think people kind of disconnect that because they, in that particular moment, are very emotionally driven. And if they take a step back and they focus on what's best for the kids, that's the best situation. That's what each of my clients, I try to direct them in that.
I guess you still want to remain a team. You're not going to be married, but when it comes to your children, you want to remain a team and always present that united front. And I think at the end of the day, that always will benefit the kids going forward, because they are going to have a lot to navigate and a lot of new realities of, well, mommy's living here and daddy's living there, or mommy and mommy are living in different places, or daddy and daddy are living in different places. And how do we now circumvent that? And how do we go around that? And, it's a whole new reality for them. Their reality kind of changes a bit more than the parents' reality, because the parents' reality moves, but it moves 100% one way. I am now separated. I am now liberated. But for the children, they're still going through both of those worlds. So we have to give them the space to kind of grow and be amazing and beautiful kids in this new reality.
Isaiah, as a father, What advice would you give to parents who are separating when it comes to making sure that they're accounting for the fact that their kids are having a lot more to adjust to than they are?
Not only as a father, but really as a child of divorce. Don't leave your children's lives. You're divorcing each other, but you're not divorcing your children. And then try to somehow get along so that you can go to the birthday parties and go to the weddings and go to the graduations. And then there's grandkids and you go to grandkids' birthday parties, et cetera, without there being any type of drama. That's what I would say.
What about you, Nicole? Do you have any insights for parents maybe who are trying to navigate this right now?
I also think that a lot of parents don't think about their own schedules too, and they have to consider that when they're making these parenting schedules. I have a lot of parents, especially fathers, who think they want the weekends because that works best. Like they have to take into consideration that they're going through a divorce, they're going to be dating, they're going to have a different schedule, and a lot of I think couples aren't really putting that in perspective when they're thinking of parenting schedules. So a lot of times you really have to like think about your life right now is not going to be your life 3 months from now. It's not going to be your life 6 months from now. And you have to think about your schedule because it's going to be best for the kids to have everybody happy in the end.
That's a really, really good point. I know I've seen it many times, and sometimes it feels like quote unquote winning and we're losing. Whoever gets the most time. At the end of the day, you got to remember that, like Nicole said, it's going to be a new reality. You're going to need each other. You're going to want to go out on a date one weekend, and you're going to want your ex-spouse to take care of the kids when you do that, even though it's not their weekend, right? And you're going to have that flexibility. It's always going to happen. Life happens. And the younger the kid, the longer these arrangements are in place for. If there's a divorce and the child is like 5, you've got about 13 years of back and forth with the kid. And you should consider that.
I mean, ideally, you want to get to a situation where the parents are working so well with each other that they'll have flexibility in the schedule. And I think that that's also what's important with keeping that amicable relationship during a divorce, because you're going to have changes with life. Life's going to throw you curveballs. You're going to have things that are going to come up last minute. And you want to make sure that you're keeping a good relationship with the other parents so that you can navigate those as you go.
I love that idea of being flexible. That's something we bring up. I feel like flexibility and communication, I feel like are repeat themes almost every episode. And maybe there's a reason for that, right?
Communication and flexibility, that's key when it comes to all this stuff. And speaking of, let's get into a little bit of the nitty gritty. What are the options when you actually want to get divorced? And there's a few, and you can Google these, and it makes it sound like they're mutually exclusive, but they're not mutually exclusive. One can really run into the other. You can do 2 at a time. You can do it kind of however you want, however it's going to work for you. There's mediation, and then there's litigation, and there's also something called collaborative divorce, which is interesting as well. And Nicole, I know you're a mediator, right? Fully trained mediator. What advice do you have for people who are considering mediation?
I'm a big fan of mediation, even though I am pretty much a litigator. I think mediation is such a great tool for a lot of couples. It's a great starting point for most couples. Mediation is a great way to get couples in a room and they sit and they try to work out the differences amongst themselves, which is amazing. In litigation, you have 2 attorneys, they're speaking with each other, and then they're speaking to you and they're speaking to your spouse, and it gets costly. Things get translated incorrectly. And with mediation, you're in there, you got one attorney typically who just oversees the process and tries to make you guys work out the issues amongst yourselves. So it's a cost saver and really just a great way to iron out your differences.
Are there things that can't be mediated?
In a family context, anything dealing with domestic violence can't be mediated. And as mediators, you also have to be very aware of the couples. There may be signs of domestic violence, or there may be signs of maybe power struggles where one couple may just say yes because that's what they feel is the best route and the safest route, even though it's not the best route for them. Those you really have to be cautious of as you're consulting with couples.
Is there a time when litigation actually makes a little more sense, or can even honestly be the more peaceful route, even though it doesn't seem like it?
I typically don't think it's ever going to be the more peaceful route. But I also think that people are very driven by emotions in this. So there's some people want to pay. They want to pay to go after their spouse because they did X, Y, and Z. And you know what? People have their day in court if that's the direction you want to go. It's not what I recommend people do, but it's what people want to push for. And that's how divorces get nasty, but that's just decisions people make. So I think if you can keep your tempers down and keep things focused on just numbers or, your kids, if you have kids, then it's the best route to do in a lot of circumstances.
Litigation, it can be an intimidating process, right? For the obvious reasons, as a judge, as attorneys. And I like to say the following when it comes to all this. It takes two to tango. So it's going to take two to mediate a case. Both parties got to want to do it. It takes two to settle the case. Same deal. It takes one to litigate. If one person does not want to agree to whatever's being discussed, then you don't really have a choice but to kind of go to litigation. Litigation does not mean your life is over and now you're going to be bankrupt. You're never going to live again. It doesn't mean that. Litigation is a tool. It's a tool to kind of get what you want at the end of the day. And the best attorneys out there, what they're going to be able to do is to try to figure out and use that system to get you through this. I mean, it's painful. Divorce is painful, but that we can minimize pain to the extent that that's possible. Now, there are cases where that's not possible. There are very serious situations out there that happen. And in those cases, then you really can't be hesitant about going to court. If you have to protect your children or like finances being stolen and things like that are happening, mediation, I don't think will help you. I think you got to go to court and you've got to get these things resolved.
I would imagine then that litigation would actually be really for the benefit of the disempowered spouse, because in a mediating room, they might not feel like they have the room to have a voice, right? To speak up and say what they want. And so the litigation sounds like it would be the option where the attorney is actually going to kind of be that assertive voice for them where they need to be, where it might not even be safe for them to do it if they're having to go home with the person that they're going through mediation with.
We've had a lot of cases. I've had a lot of cases where there is complete power imbalance, where spouses don't know what the finances are, don't understand the finances, have spent years in a relationship where they've just been told what to do and don't know how to get out of that kind of thought process. And they need an advocate. In those cases, they are not good candidates for mediation. And that goes into that whole power imbalance I mentioned before. And it kind of goes a little bit into the domestic violence too, and it can get to that level. Those cases, by all means, need to go to litigation. And, people also hide things, and those things, as Isaiah touched upon before, when you're in a circumstance, when there's businesses and you think the spouse is hiding things and you really need to dig into it, then litigation might be the route you have to go.
I had no awareness that this was even possible, that people didn't know about their spouse's finances, that people would hide it, until I opened a practice in the financial district and have these kind of Wall Street couples. And now I'm like, wait a sec, this is incredibly common. It's honestly it's alarming how common it is.
It's alarming if you think about it in a divorce context, but if you're thinking about it in a marriage context, I don't think it's as alarming. People play their roles in a marriage, and you should trust your spouse, right? You married that person. The fact that one spouse knows less about finances and the other spouse knows more, I mean, that's okay. Well, that spouse knows more about the other things that are going on. And there needs to be kind of that respect going back and forth. What happens when people come into my office is that then that respect is lacking. There's a lack of respect for the person who knows less about finances now. Well, now there's a problem. And that's where, I come in or Nicole comes in, and you can mediate those things as well. I mean, at the end of the day, it is what it is. Financial disclosure is financial disclosure, and you have to do it. Another important point I wanted to mention, though, was that, your attorneys, people get very intimidated when they have to speak to attorneys, but your attorney is your advocate. That is what you're paying for. So your attorney is your voice, and really your best voice when it comes to going to court or dealing with some of these complex situations. If it ever gets to the point where you think you don't want certain things, you could always tell your attorney that. Whereas litigation could be more aggressive in posture. The posture being taken should really represent where the clients are. So the flaw in the aggressiveness in the system is more representative of where the parties are than I think where the actual attorneys are, is what I would say.
Okay, I feel like we've all either seen on some TV show or heard from someone anecdotally these situations where one person drains the joint accounts. Is this something that people should actually be aware of, or should try to get their ducks in a row when they're getting ready for a divorce? Like what to do with these joint accounts, or who's entitled to what?
I mean, I like to tell people that happens often, where a spouse goes and they drain an account right before they file for divorce. But I tell my clients, it doesn't matter if he has it located at Chase, he has it located at Bank of America, he has it located in his pocket. Half of it's yours, presumptively under the law. So it's just a matter of having him return the funds or having her return the funds at that point. If you feel that you have a spouse that could potentially do that, then you should protect yourself if you think that divorce is looming, and make sure that you have access to funds separately. I do recommend that to clients.
So how do you recommend, or what steps could someone take then to protect themselves?
A lot of clients have separate bank accounts. It just depends on the circumstances. Are all your accounts joined, or do you have your own individual bank accounts? If you have an individual bank account, make sure you have enough funds in that account to support not only yourself, but to fund also litigation if you have to proceed with getting an attorney.
And then also, you can also file for divorce, because in New York, we have these things called the automatic orders, which kind of prevents people broadly from doing that. And there's financial disclosure. And right now, nowadays money is on paper. You can see it everywhere. It's electronic, and there's ways to trace just about everything. So, somebody takes out a couple $100,000 from the Chase account, well, it's going to be reflected on the Chase statements. And if I represent the other person, well, you better believe you'll get that money back.
Are there any niche, strange areas of divorce that maybe people don't think about that actually do become contentious, or somewhere where people maybe can miss some steps?
One thing that I've seen come up is firearms. If you have firearms, you kind of need to be a little extra careful. If you have an order of protection labeled against you, then you have to turn over all the firearms. And it's easier, I would think, to call the police and say, hey, this person has firearms in the house. You get a little bit of a heightened response. So having firearms in the house is something that you should definitely consider.
So, Nicole, if there's one thing or one piece of advice that you like people who are going through a divorce to have, what would that be?
Keep the perspective and understand, especially with the emotional element. I tell my clients it just takes a while for your heart and your head to meet up. So things are going to take time. It's a process. So emotionally, it's just the way you're feeling today is not the way you're going to feel 6 months from now or a year from now. And just select somebody that can be an advocate for you if you're going for an attorney that you feel comfortable with, because it really is a very emotional process. But just take a step back and go step by step and go at your own pace.
If people want to get in contact with you, how can they do that?
So I'm with Rosenfeld Vallejo Justy. We're a matrimonial firm in Midtown Manhattan. I know, obviously, work with Isaiah. My email address is nicole@rvjlaw.com.
Thanks, Nicole. I think this was awesome, and I think it was very informative. I think one line you said kind of said it best, and says what I think about divorce as well, in that it really just doesn't have to be that bad. Let it be a new beginning. Next episode will kind of be like our last episode of the mid-season, right? We'll have a little bit of a mid-season break. And so next time, we'll be chatting about, everything we kind of experienced. And I understand that we might have a little special guest.
I know, I'm so excited. I feel like we had to do some coercing and some pleading. But honestly, I could not be more excited to have our guest, who is a dear, dear friend to me, and I think now a dear friend to you, Isaiah. Our producer, Rich. It's funny because there are two people hosting this podcast every week, but really there's three of us, because Rich is always in our little Zoom Brady Bunch squares as well. And it's funny because even though we don't hear his voice, I feel like he's just as much of a part of this podcast as you and I are.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Love Me or Leave Me is a podcast production of the Board brand. This podcast is for informational purposes only. It does not constitute medical or legal advice and is not a substitute for professional consultation, diagnoses, or treatment. Always follow up with a licensed attorney or healthcare professional who can address your specific needs. Thanks for listening.